On that now, joining me to discuss, Zerlina Maxwell, Director of Progressive Programming at SiriusXM and host of the show Zerlina on Peacock, and Kurt Bardella, USA Today contributor and Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee advisor. And listen, guys, I want to let you know we're trying to hook up Elise Jordan. Of course, you all know her as former aide in the George W. Bush White House. And one of our political analysts are having a little bit of technical trouble, so she might pop up, and we hope she does. But, Zerlina, we'll start with you here. As NBC's Jonathan Allen puts it quite succinctly, defeated presidents usually go away, at least for a long while, not Donald Trump. What do you make of his return to the public eye?
Well, isn't this on brand for Donald Trump, not to go away when people really, really would like him to? But I think that this is a moment that the GOP is likely going to regret later. They had a moment in the 24 to 48 hours after the insurrection to distance themselves from Donald Trump. They've chosen not to do that. And now they're in a position, we're heading into the summer, the year before the midterm elections, with a president who lost the popular vote 2 times as the de facto leader of the party. And so who knows what he's going to say, Alex? I think that's what we're all very concerned about in terms of what he is going to do with the platform and a microphone in front of him. He's going to call the election fraud. He's going to say it was rigged. He's going to speculate that if somehow the sham audit in Maricopa County by the cyber ninjas completes and they're not even nearly done, that somehow is going to overturn the election and put him back into power. It's all delusional, Alex.
I got to tell you, even just listening to you articulate that sentence, I'm like, ugh, my gosh. It just is nonsensical. But to that degree, in terms of what he's going to speak about, Kurt, the Washington Post is reporting that Trump remains, quote, relentlessly focused on the false claim that the November election was stolen from him and is increasingly consumed with the notion that ballot reviews pushed by his supporters around the country could prove that he won, according to people familiar with his comments. So, look, didn't Republicans just vote down a commission on the January 6th insurrection? And it was done in part because they didn't want to rehash the 2020 election. What do you think the odds are that Trump gets on stage and does exactly that? Is that the best play he's got to maintain power and influence?
I mean, Alex, it's also why reportedly Republicans ousted Liz Cheney from her leadership post, because they wanted to, what was it Kevin McCarthy said? Move on, talk about the future, not relitigate the past. And here the leader of their party, Donald Trump, will use the stage that he has available to him to do just that, to relitigate the last election, to continue to advance these false and dangerous notions about the integrity of our election. And I'll tell you, Alex, I think we've reached a point here. We all have to understand that this isn't something that will go on without any consequence anymore. We saw on January 6th the consequences of rhetoric, of extreme rhetoric championed and espoused by Donald Trump about the integrity of our election. And when he goes out there and says stuff like, well, he could be reinstalled in August and we should continue to keep counting votes over and over and over again until he gets the result that he wants, he is setting the signal to the same people that perpetrated the insurrection on January 6th that he wants another one, that it's okay, that he endorses it. And we know that it's just not empty rhetoric. We know that people that are in his camp, they don't interpret it as just rhetorical flair. They see it as their marching orders. And so when Donald Trump goes out there and does this, he is creating an environment in which another and a much more violent and deadly insurrection could happen.
Yeah, but this environment that he's creating, for how long, Kurt? Because we've heard New York Times' Maggie Haberman is reporting that Trump has been telling a number of people he expects he's going to get reinstated to the presidency by August. 2 months from now. That is not possible. I mean, talk about delusional, right? But according to the Daily Beast, the person who inspired that idea, MyPillow CEO Mike Lindell, I mean, does Trump's behavior suggest he genuinely believes this? And if it does not happen in August, does that further deflate his legitimacy, at least in the minds of some?
What gives him legitimacy are people like Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, the Republicans who on January 6th walked back into the House chamber and still voted against certifying the free and fair election. The same Republicans who have opposed a bipartisan January 6th 9/11 style commission to investigate what happened. As long as these Republicans continue to violate truth, to violate oversight, to violate the integrity of our democratic process, Donald Trump is king. His power comes from the Republicans who know better and still pander to these dangerous, extreme, rhetorical fanatics. That's where his power comes from.
Extraordinary. Zerlina, I think you touched on this, but I want to delve further into the new NBC think piece arguing that upcoming Trump rallies are actually going to help Democrats remind voters why they didn't re-elect him, writing, the return of Trump's hours-long rambling rallies is an opportunity to remind the American people that Republican craziness hasn't dialed down a notch since his defeat last year, and to remind Democrats that they have reason to focus on their shared values rather than their increasingly bitter Senate fights. So do you think in that sense, Zerlina, Trump is going to work to benefit Democrats?
Well, I think the difference between Trump rallies now and Trump rallies before is that we have, for the last 6 months, lived with the same president. We don't wake up every single morning wondering what the tweet was overnight or in the middle of the night. We don't worry that he's going to tweet us into an international crisis. We don't worry that he's telling us to inject bleach during a pandemic. And so for the last 6 months, we have, gotten a little distance from our trauma of the Trump era. And I think with that clarity and lens where we can see what it looks like to have a competent administration, at least in terms, and most importantly, in terms of vaccine distribution and the pandemic, the immediate crisis, I think that that contrast will be beneficial to Democrats as they try to craft a message going into the 2022 midterms. I think the best message for Democrats is one in which they focus on the things that they're doing for the American people. So I think there's a good argument to say, get rid of that filibuster so you can actually do things for the American people.
Yeah, that's another discussion for sure. Let me ask you about this, though, Zerlina, because Trump shut down his blog this week after just 29 days, and the reason he did it? Low readership, low influence. This blog was essentially his only form of communication to his base after he's been kicked off of the other social media platforms. And, Facebook just saying, yeah, now for 2 years. I mean, he's off. So what does the failure of his blog say? Do you think losing Facebook and Twitter has taken the wind out of his sails? I mean, is it only a matter of time before he recedes into irrelevance?
I think that he'll recede into relevance to a small minority of the population, and that will always be true. But as those people are increasingly marginalized, and they should be by Republican leadership, to Kurt's point, I think that he will be long forgotten because he's not forced into our space, right? Twitter and Facebook allowed him to post and sort of show up on your front doorstep every morning spewing nonsense, right? And now that he does not have those platforms and you have to go seek out his rambling nonsense, there were a lot fewer people that wanted to do that. And so as a former blogger, I have to say it's harder than it looks. And so maybe the president will find another hobby in his retirement.
Yeah, we'll see. So here's the question we were teasing, Kurt, and it goes to you. When appearing on a right-wing radio show last night, Trump called a proposal, it came from Steve Bannon originally, that he run for the House in 2022 to try to win the Speaker's gavel. He called that so interesting. What's your reaction?
God. I mean, anything.
That's enough.
I mean,
right
Donald Trump is he's so desperate for attention. He's so desperate to get everybody talking about him. And to me, that's what this is. I mean, anything that gets thrown that he can just talk about and get people excited and agitated about, that he'll entertain, is just par for the course. If anything, the only reason why I could see him running for anything in 2022 is because he's scared to death of what his legal situation will be and would want to use public office as a legal shield. That's the only reason why he would ever consider doing anything before 2024.
Interesting.